Hi guys, welcome to Product Circle. Hope you're all well, keeping safe and healthy. I can't believe it's the last day of April. I'm not entirely sure how this has happened, but I suppose with 7 weeks where every day feels like the previous and the next, it's they all kind of blur into one a little bit. But somehow we're almost in May, so it's pretty crazy. I welcome to Product Circle. So this evening we're going to be hearing from a few of very senior designers within London. So we've got Greta Anderson, who is the lead UX UI designer with Swiss Re. She is going to be talking us through MVP. She's got a pretty good case study, I believe, on a project that she worked on where it had very little funding. It was quite a small team, and they were able to build, design, and scale, probably not in that order, an MVP within 3 months. I'm not sure if any of you were here or there at the event, the Product Circle event that we ran in. I believe it was about sort of September time last year at the app business, and that had a delivery lead, an agile coach who was working on a very similar project where it was all about sort of rapidly scaling an MVP and how to release that. So it'd be really interesting to hear from Greta from the design perspective, which comes into that, and as a sort of lead member of that team, and the challenges that she went through, and also the kind of benefits that she got from potentially leaving out some certain aspects in order to get it released at ASAP. So that'll be really, really interesting. And then we're going to be hearing from Nabila Khalid. So Nabila is she's the lead designer with Cancer Central. So she's going to be talking through empathetic design within healthcare, within healthtech, sorry. Obviously, the health tech industry as a whole and the digital health, industry and sector is something which is under a massive spotlight at the moment. We've got, businesses that are, people were never aware of previously, that have either been around for a while or they're brand new businesses that the NHS has invested in. And, they're becoming the tools of the future, really, when it comes to healthcare. So it's going to be really interesting to hear from her about when you're designing something, rather than just having to design another platform or another website for a client, it's more a case of, the people, the end user of your product doesn't necessarily want to be there. They don't want to have to be using your platform. And so it's all about just sort of, the user, the end user, and how they are able to, benefit from the empathetic, considerations which go into the design. So I know that there's a few people within the audience that work within the health tech sector that I've invited, and I can see a few sort of familiar faces and stuff like that, or familiar names rather. But yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of key takeaways from this. So with both of the topics, you're going to be able to ask Q&A. So there's going to be a Q&A, sorry. You're going to be able to ask questions. So if you can just make sure that you write down in the comments section, not sure which side of me it's on, but write down your questions in the comments section. At the end of each talk, both of the ladies will be able to, have a chat and answer your questions and share their insights on each other's talks and stuff like that as well. So should be quite an interesting evening. Please feel free to get as engaged as possible. And then, if you do have anything that's any questions for me, obviously feel free to reach out. I'll be here, and I hope you enjoy. So without much further ado, let's crack on with the event. Cheers.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. This is my first time doing sort of a YouTube online talk. I normally give talks in person, so this is a bit of a new experience for me. So never mind the background, I currently live in a building site, so I'm also hoping that the next 20 minutes will be undisturbed. So, as I said, I currently work for Swiss Re, as you've probably seen, but a lot of the projects I work with are under NDA, so I can't really show you anything of that yet, but hopefully in the future. However, I've worked with a brilliant company just before this role called Entail and their podcast app, and I kind of want to just tell you a little bit about that journey and it's not health, of course, but actually when we did the user research and also some of the content I then found is a lot of it is actually very kind of health focused and mind focused. So I guess you could say it can somehow falls into the health bracket. Anyways, let's get started. So what is Entel? As I said, Entel is a podcast app. And I listened to podcasts before. I had a bit of experience with apps, but of course I didn't know all of them. So the first things that we did was sort of check the landscape. And at the time, there was already a lot of podcast app out there, but they weren't really doing what potentially people wanted it to do. So for example, some of them were really low social, so you could listen, but you couldn't really share things very well. Some of them were lacking content in terms of you wanted to see actual physical evidence of like, who's this person, what's the food look like, where's that place, and some of them were really high social, but then kind of didn't really give you the sort of extra content or the sort of better sort of snippet sharing. So we positioned ourselves really in the rich content area, but we really wanted to cover a little bit of all of this. As I said, we set ourselves quite a tight target. I call this talk 0 to 1 in 3 months, because we really did bring out the beta MVP in just under 3 months. And it was intense. We were only 7 people, only 1 designer. So we really had to work well as a team. So I'll get a little bit into that later. So of course you have to kind of do your research. Who's your target audience? So that's what we always start with. And we found out that 44% of 18 to 35-year-olds listen to podcasts regularly. Of those, actually, a lot of them are very affluent. They're sort of 1.6 times more likely to have quite a lot of money, which also means that, we can look into prescription models. We can see if we can sell them extra things, and that really helps. Also, we found out that half of them spend more than 3 hours per week listening, whether that is through commuting or listening while they were doing other things. So that was really helpful because, of course, you also need to know how much content you have to provide. If you just imagine Netflix would only bring out a little bit every once in a while, then that wouldn't be very exciting. So you kind of really have to keep it up and keep it fresh. And so that was very good knowledge to have. As I said, there were existing podcast apps out there, but they were a little bit out of date. So podcasting really started in the web world, where it was kind of streaming, slow. It wasn't really created for mobile. It wasn't created for sort of social sharing necessarily. And it was very hard to discover new things. So there wasn't really anything innovative in terms of how we would analyze what you're listening to and kind of offer you things. And that's what we were looking for. So our idea was really that we sort of supplement every audio piece with rich content so that you can see, that place in Taiwan, that recipe, that person. And then we can also split it into chapters so that we can easily share things that were funny or interesting with a friend. Because even the best of friends doesn't really have time to listen to something that's an hour and a half long if you send that to them. And most of those episodes can be quite long. And then also the one thing that we wanted to do was kind of let people discover things in not just by one niche that they've decided to listen to, but also maybe what friends are listening to, what the things that they're really into in terms of topics, so that we make that a little bit more catered. Let me just give you a little bit of background about Entel. Entel was founded in 2017 by Will and Graham. It was part of the Founders Factory in West London, which is an accelerator and incubator place. So, they had a sort of good setup, but of course, you still have to put the hard graft in yourself. Alongside Will and Graham, we were only 5 other people. So as I said, it was a very small team. So it was very much about sharing ideas and kind of everybody doing a little bit of everything. But what was important, I think that's why we moved so fast, is really you've hired someone for their expertise and you have to just give them trust and kind of let them do their thing. So of course you can veto and you can discuss, but at the end of the day, the person that has the expertise in that field should really follow through. And I think that's why we worked really well together. We would tease and discuss and veto, but generally everybody was doing just their job, and that was really, really, really good. So before I kind of go into the build, I just quickly wanted to show you the video that we did when we finally launched, and we kind of shared this on social media, and I might give you a little snippet for the app. Sorry, I just realized on this video I have forgotten to turn off my notifications, so let's see what comes through. So yeah, we actually launched with Apple first, but actually now you can download on Apple and Android. But we just found there was a bigger target audience on Apple, so we started with that. That was sort of a pure kind of numbers decision. So let's just go into the build. As I said, it was sort of very early on. So what I do, and you don't have to read this all, is just kind of show you my structure system. So essentially, I always start with kind of like information architecture to understand where will things sit, even if they're not for MVP, even things for phase 2. It's very important for me to understand where they potentially fit in the future, because otherwise it's really hard for me to kind of try and shoehorn them in later on. So I try and get this sort of overall vision of the long term, and then kind of skin it back from there to the MVP. So then I can't draw for, I'm really, really terrible. Anyways, I always start with really bad scribbles because it's just really fast. Like, there's no point using a program on a computer that kind of slows you down if you just want to get ideas and flows on the table. So whenever I get a brief, I would basically just discuss it with the product owner or the team, and then I would just start with some rough scribbles to kind of just get the ideas out of my head. Then I would present those terrible scribbles, and if they would make any sense to anyone, I would come up with a slightly neater version, but still very rough wireframes, just to kind of get sign-off or agreement from the development team to see if those features are even feasible and make sense, and from the product owner and so forth. But I mean, as you say, they're like super quick, super dirty, and you can get them done in like sometimes half an hour, and you can have a decision there and then, which I think was crucial because you just didn't have time to lose, and you didn't have a big team to spend time on features for long. Once I would have the scribble direction signed off by the product owner, of course I would then build a rapid prototype. Again, I think it's important to keep that very lean, so I never build like a huge prototype of the entire app. It was always little snippets of features so that I can take them easily into user testing. And so I basically just work with Sketch and Envision to just have a really quick mobile setup to test it kind of in situ with the people. So it was also important, of course, to test with users that actually use Apple in this case, because they know about the functionality there. So as I mentioned, alongside, we not only build an app in 3 months, we also build a publishing tool, which is like extra hard to do 2 things at the same time. The publishing tool was really for the content creators. And so it was a completely different target audience, completely different tools, completely different features. So it was really interesting to do that in parallel, to kind of see like the back end and the front of, how does this sort of get fed into here, and how kind of does it come out to the user. So we also did user testing for this, of course, to try and kind of get out something that is actually usable for the creators, which was quite a challenge because I'd never done anything like this before, so it was very different. So let's just quickly go a little bit into the testing. As I said, like I always say that, and I'm always still surprised every job I go into how many people don't take this seriously. But I always say test as part of every sprint if you can. You don't have to spend much money on people. You don't have to test with a huge amount of people. You don't have to spend much money on that. We were just bribing people with like 20 quid Amazon vouchers here. We would go around the office because the Founders Factory essentially has lots of different companies, and so we'd get people who weren't involved in Intel at all, which was good because they weren't biased and they kind of just give their quick feedback. We then target specific users through social media. We were kind of recruiting them, people who are actually listening to podcasts, to kind of get their instant feedback. And I mean, literally, we got it from everywhere. People got really involved in the US, which was super exciting. There seems to be like a huge group of people who are super into podcasts there. So it's super crucial to do it all the time and as quickly as you can, and feedback the results instantly. So don't spend time making these beautiful presentations that you then present like 4 weeks later, because you potentially lose quite a lot of time when things have already progressed and developed. So the idea thing is, as I said, always quick and dirty, test fast, work with the results and pivot if something hasn't gone to plan. Number 5, I cried in between at home. If you had a great idea, you thought it was a great idea, and then it got ripped to shreds in user testing, you found no one wanted it, then of course you have to pivot. And pivoting is actually quite easy. If you have a lot of things on the roadmap, you can just shift priorities and work on those other things for the next sprint, which means the development team has enough to do. And as I said, you just repeat that. And that's really the only way. It's not rocket science to find out what you're supposed to be building, because I, as a designer, I always, I get into every project is new, everything is new. I've worked from fashion to healthcare to IoT to banking, and I'm not an expert in any of these. And so it's really my target audience that I'm building for, and that's why I need to test so much. So the testing methods, I always like to do a mix of things. So of course there's like the task-based, where, as I said, you build a nice prototype. In Vision, you kind of set people in front of the mobile phone, you give them a task and see if they can perform. That's a very good one to test, because you instantly find out if something's not working for them, if they don't understand it. Then I do what I call it might have a different name, sorry, I'll probably piss some people off if I say the wrong name. I just call it a prioritization session, where I kind of just work with rough wireframes. I cut them into pieces, and I sort of find out what things people might want to see first in a scroll, or what features they want to kind of get into deeper first. Where I kind of find out like the weak points and orders, and also information architecture. So actually it's a very quick, easy, quite playful way of finding out how your app is built. And then I also do the other, don't worry, this is very small. I just wanted to show you the different wireframes. This was all for a search that we built. And I like to do co-design sessions. So essentially, get ideas from the people who come in, because everybody's used other apps. Everybody's, knows how their mobile phone works and how they like to use it. So it's really interesting to kind of see how they would envision a search could work and be sort of structured. And so we kind of use that a lot to kind of get down to a T how this search would kind of deliver results. So that was another kind of method. The test results, of course, as I said, not always does it go to plan, so that's fine. So we obviously had this plan of rich content. Everybody wants it all the time. But then, of course, we found out that people are commuting, running, sleeping, even while they're listening to podcasts. And so they don't want to look at their phone all the time. And so even though they said we definitely want this content and we want it accessible, they don't want to be reminded of it every second of the podcast episode. So in between we had like these noise, so that it kind of pings when there's a new image, but that could happen quite often, and that would be a little bit disturbing. And also we found out that people don't want to necessarily look at their phone at that moment in time. So we felt it potentially will be very important to kind of let them look at the content before or after, not just while listening, because they might just be interested in kind of getting a bit more in their own time. Also, people said that some episodes, because we were thinking of the chapters, and we're like, great, so you can just skip through. But that doesn't always work for every kind of podcast. People said that, some episodes, it's very continuous input, like a story, and you can't just skip a bit because you'll just miss. Whereas maybe more like a news podcast, you can skip. They're just talking about the football team you're not interested in, and you can just skip that chapter. So it lends itself for some and not for others. But they really like the sharing of the small chapters, because they said, as I said before, people want to share stuff, but it's too long, and the friends that they send it to, they're not really listening to it because it is too much. But sending a little snippet is easy to share via social media, and people actually get into it. Some of the general navigation wasn't understood. That was because we had like some sort of content that was rich and some just audio, and we didn't really know what to do with it in the beginning. So it was kind of good to find out that was confusing people, and also we would need sort of first use tutorials to kind of make people understand what the app is all about. So here's an example. As I said, on the left, you kind of have like the rich content, where every dot means there's like a new image or a new piece of content. And on the right, that would be just an audio player. And people didn't really understand what the difference was. And so we decided that really we need to kind of bring in in-app tutorials, kind of explain to people, and then kind of try and align that. So as I said, the outcome was really that it was all about clarity of use, that the visual content still needs to be accessible, but also before or after listening to the podcast. And that was really about the micro UX, so people understand why something is or isn't happening in that point. So for example, we were discussing whether we have download only on Wi-Fi because some of the content's really heavy, and so we should obviously tell people why that is not downloading at that moment in time. So here, just an example of the first ideas of the in-app tutorial. When you first join, that it sort of tells you where things are and what they do. Of course, you can always skip them. And then also here, as I said, like if something's not downloading, you need to know why it's not downloading so that you kind of get a little mini animation to see once it is happening or if it's not happening. So yeah, as I said, like we were an amazing team. It was really hard work, but it really rewarding because it was such a quick kind of implementation, and it was a steep learning curve and really exciting. So what's happened since? Of course, that was already 2018. I'm proud to say that I don't win a lot of awards, but I also never go forward for awards. Entel won with the MVP design a Webby Award, which I'm very proud of. Also, we got a huge amount of good positive user feedback. So that was very exciting. You might wonder why I've just changed the color scheme. That's of course because we kind of went into a rebrand, which I'll talk about in a second. So we also then got a huge amount of investment. Entel's now valued at 3.5 million, which is amazing. So hopefully that's just going to go up and up and up. We've got huge amount of amazing content, whether you're into true crime or, as I said, sort of mental health or recipes or anything. You really find anything on there. So it's really, really good. The rebrand has recently happened. You might have seen sort of some target ads on social media, and I think it looks really beautiful. So the team's done a good job, and it just looks fresh and modern. Also, they've of course brought in a whole lot of features that we were planning in the beginning, but there wasn't the time necessary to build them in, like bookmarks or the way you kind of download things onto your phone to hold so they can listen in flight mode and so forth. Yeah, that was really it. That was a very fast kind of run through what Entel is and Entel does and my involvement. But I really enjoyed it. And as I said, like the journey really, no matter what job I go into, is always the same. It's, quick ideas, quick feedback amongst the team, quick user testing, and really just chucking it out there and see what your actual audience thinks, because there's no point sort of keeping it in the closet. So yeah, go and download Entel. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to your questions, and I hope this was okay. And I think I only got one WhatsApp from my news app, so I think one message from my news app, so it should be okay. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.
Great. That was awesome, Greta. Thanks for that. And for those of you at home, so we have Nabila and Greta here who are going to be able to answer a few of your questions. So please do fire away in the comments section. How was that watching yourself there, Greta?
Yeah, a bit awkward. I was just saying that I don't understand why Hollywood stars don't watch their own movies. A bit cringy, but I guess you kind of get used to it. I have a whole lot more respect now for YouTubers.
Exactly.
Not easy.
And Nabila, how did you find Greta's talk as a sort of peer?
Yeah, that was very interesting, and I could see similarities in how, when I was working for Cancer Central in the early phases, in the process and the needing to do things fast, and the process, it was that there is definitely an overlap. I would be interested to know, Greta, what your process is like as a lead and how you divide time between workshops and individual one-on-one work, and how do you delegate it? Because for me personally, I've never been led by a senior. I've been working individually or become a lead, kind of. So I'd be curious to know if other people do it different to how I do it, or the same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have that much experience as a lead. I don't know if I'm a good lead, but in the current role in Swiss Re, it's very, very different as such. Swiss Re is such a vast company. They have offices all over the world. They have offices in Hong Kong and Sydney and America and Zurich, and I'm in the London office. And I was brought in as a lead because the problem we had was that we have lots of designers everywhere, but no one was talking to each other. And also we weren't really necessarily using all the same tools, or something was a little bit outdated. And so I think my main target as a lead is really to kind of try and bring everybody together as a community, and also to so everybody uses the same tools. So we've all aligned on Sketch and Envision, so that it's a sort of a sharing community, so that we can basically use everything together. And I mean, from knowledge, but also like steal share files from each other. There's no point, like if someone builds a chatbot, in Australia, there's no point me then building a chatbot from scratch again, for example. So that was like really the biggest goal, and also to build like a sort of trusting community, so that, quite frankly, if the shit hits the fan somewhere, you need like other designers to bounce ideas off and get things off your chest, and really sort of have a team to talk to. And I think that's sort of my biggest aim as a lead, I guess, to just bring all of the designers together.
And you said that the process of when you designed this podcast app is different, is similar to when you're doing a health tech startup. What are the differences? Are there any differences that you've experienced when you're working in healthcare?
I think there's definitely differences that I see now, in sense of, first of all, I know this sounds terrible, but not everybody puts the same emphasis on accessibility, even though they should. But I think because now this is a big corporate organization and it's sort of health and life oriented, there's a massive emphasis on accessibility, so we're trying to get that right. But then the other thing is really empathy. So if someone calls and they have a critical illness, or if their husband's just passed away, something like that, then it's really important that we're human, and whether it's a chatbot or someone on the phone or whatever the transaction is you're doing with the customer, has to be really human, and not just what's the date of death, oh, sorry to hear, and then move on. So it's really important to kind of get that right. And I think that's much bigger now in this project I'm working on than, of course, it was in a podcast, because a podcast is more of a happy, clappy surrounding. It doesn't matter if you don't get it 100% right.
Users are less vulnerable as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. To the workshop question you had earlier, so at the moment it's a very big mix. So I do work on specific projects where I kind of do the design, but then also if sort of there's teams where we're building up the agile work process, because it's like a new team, then I also help on workshops and sort of guide with a roadmap sort of build up, but also like how do we all work together as a team? What do we want to get out of the features or the product? So I do that as well, but I find every workshop's different. It always sort of depends on what the need is at that moment in time. But it's pretty much, I mean, the setup is always the same, a whole bunch of Post-its on the wall, and sort of just trying to get targets out of it, really.
Thank you. That's interesting.
Great. Thanks for that then, Greta. So yeah, I think we'll go over to Nabila's talk. Nabila, is there anything that you kind of wanted to preempt your talk with, or are you wanting to sort of answer the questions afterwards?
I'll answer afterwards, but just a disclaimer again that my first time as well on YouTube, so be forgiving.
There you go. No, I'm sure you'll do very well. But keep the questions coming, guys.
Hi, thank you, Duncan, for inviting me to speak, and everyone joining us today. I'm really humbled by this opportunity to talk about designing empathic health tech products that are accessible for the public. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just here to share what I've learnt. Before I begin, just a little bit about me. I'm a parent before anything else, a mummy to this little Bambi. I'm innately an empathic person, so I pursued a career in healthcare. I graduated in BSc Biomedical Sciences at the University of Manchester, and over that period I gained experience in various healthcare settings, working as a healthcare assistant, shadowing doctors. I even got to observe surgeries. I took a gap year after graduation in 2010 with the intention to go into research. But I'm still on that gap year. What can you do? Because life happens, right? I joined the family business to revive a non-performing Indian gold jewelry website. This was a new industry and there were a lot of new challenges. At the time, there were no other Indian gold e-commerce websites. Customers visiting the shop and purchasing in-store, they made frequent visits to watch the gold rate before they made their purchase. The prices of the gold jewelry in Indian gold shops fluctuates based on the latest gold rate price. It's not a fixed price as in English jewelry shops. So we tried to replicate this in-store gold shopping experience to our online e-commerce site. So on there, the product prices change twice daily, and our customers this way know that they're getting the best deal. Whilst I was working on this project, I learned information architecture, taxonomy, nomenclature. I had a great mentor who was the developer on the project, and through this experience I also learned graphic design, business, UX, SEO, social media marketing. At this point, a part of me was really missing the healthcare world. I felt like my experiences were just too random. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you is that many of us are facing a lot of uncertainty at the moment with everything going on with the coronavirus. Businesses are closing down, people are getting laid off. A lot of our career plans, as we had set them out, they're just falling apart. And I understand what that feels like. This is a quote that really resonated with me. Parenthood can prompt mothers to think differently about what they want from their careers. Over the past year, I came to this realization. All my seemingly random experiences have a mountain of value. So instead of getting frustrated at them, I need to own them. And that's why I founded Evouke. It's complete empathic design and strategy solutions for health tech, including UX, branding, social media, and content. I can work directly with startups or with other agencies on health tech projects or scale-ups. It's a parent-friendly and flexible and remote work setup from the start. If you're a freelancer and are interested in designing empathic products that make a real difference to the lives of others, then please do get in touch with me. You can find my email address and my social handles at the bottom right of the slides. Also, I'll point out that I've put slide numbers on so that if anybody has questions on a particular slide, they can reference it easily. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was empathy. The State of the Heart report collects data every couple of years on emotional intelligence, and they do this for 100,000 people in 126 countries. And in just 2 years, they reported there's been a 3.3% drop in people's ability to navigate emotions, 2.9% drop in people's ability to engage intrinsic motivation, and a 2.4% drop in empathy. That basically means people globally are more emotionally volatile, less self-motivated, and less compassionate. And we just have to look at the news or go on Twitter just for 5 minutes, and that's the story everywhere. This article I really recommend by Daniel Harvey. It's very thought-provoking, and you can view it as a talk or read it as an article. He talks about how we live in an outrage economy, and amongst other things, how he shows how Trump made use of the outrage economy to get significantly more media coverage and draw attention to himself. He talks about how some emotions, such as outrage, are more profitable than others. A 2017 study by Yale neuroscientist Molly Crockett suggests that outrage is a primary driver of viral social media posts, and posts that evoke happiness are a very distant second. Here is one of the many examples Daniel gives of how we can design more responsibly. I'm going to go on and talk about working for Cancer Central as the lead UX designer. It's an empathic health tech product for people affected by cancer, and we won Health Tech Innovation of the Year 2019, which is really exciting for us. This is Evouke. She's my angel, and she's also the CEO and founder of Cancer Central, and she very deservedly won Women in IT Entrepreneur of the Year. And she was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 37, and she was a director of IT, so really tech literate. And that's when she came up with Cancer Central during a difficult year of test procedures and treatments. And her story all started with a hat. She was about to have chemotherapy, and she was off work and at home, and she just wanted cheering up, and she thought she could go and have a fun day out, go hat shopping and make a day of it. After using Google for 2 hours trying to find hat shops, she says she was perplexed. She couldn't find anything locally. Surely there was a way to drop a pin on a map and see all the support available around. Sadly, most of the results were US-based, and she was just frustrated. Why can't I just go to one place and get all the information I need? Evouke says, having made a career in the technology industry, I'd like to think I was pretty savvy, but on this occasion, I was frustrated, upset, and felt I had failed. This can't be right. Most of the valuable information was found by chance when talking to people. For example, Avril only heard about the Willow Foundation a few days before her birthday, after which she would no longer be eligible to participate. There is a very simple framework to design empathically by Kupri and Visa. The first stage of that is discovery. And in this stage, we absorb what the users are going through and feel what they are feeling instead of reacting immediately, trying to solve the problem. The second stage is the immersion stage, and this stage we attempt to directly experience the lives, context, and activities and environments of the user and uncover intangible needs and feelings that indicate what should ideally change in the product we're focusing on. The third stage, connection, often occurs naturally during the first two stages. The key here is to be sincere, and it can sometimes help to recall your own similar experience. And the last stage is detachment. This is where you're returning to your role as a designer to come up with a solution. It's kind of the opposite to what you're doing in the first three stages, where you're getting rid of any biases you have as a designer and being very open to what the user is going through. But in detachment, you're trying to get rid of user biases and trying to think practically as a designer on how to find solutions to the user's problems. User stories are really good for the first three stages because to satisfy the user, we must connect, relate, and empathize with them. Stories reveal insights we can only be aware of by interacting with the potential user. One of the users I interviewed, who I'm going to call Adam, I'm going to share his story with you guys. He's 55 years old. His profession is a sales consultant in the tech industry. He has a high proficiency in tech and he loves to cycle. He was diagnosed with bowel cancer 3 years ago and then re-diagnosed with lung cancer last year. And at the time of interview, he was awaiting scan results post-treatment. Adam describes going through 3 phases during the journey, and at each stage, a range of emotions and different challenges when trying to find information. In the first stage, which is the diagnosis stage, you get your symptoms, you go to the GP refers you to a consultant, they do some tests, and then you're diagnosed. And during this, you go through a period of personal research, trying to understand what is it? Is it curable? Is it treatable? What journey might I go on? And you shock yourself. You shock yourself with all the information going around. What could it be? What are my chances of survival? Where could it spread to? And then after the diagnosis, you calm down a little bit. There's a plan. You're on a journey. You're in the doctor's hands and they're going to do something about it. But then you start researching the treatment. What are they going to do? What is this radiotherapy? What is this operation? Are there any alternatives? Doctors won't decide for you. They just give you the options. Adam had to decide between a complicated operative procedure and he wasn't sure if it was the right way to go forward. If it wasn't for his brother's friend who was a surgeon giving him advice, he said he would have been completely lost. The last stage, recovery, this phase is the hardest to find information on. Adam's biggest worry was, would he be able to cycle again? He had a colostomy, so he had wounds on his abdomen. He was unsure how he can exercise, how can he get back into life again, where can he go to find people that have had similar experiences, and is there a diet he should follow? He really struggled with this. You know, with all the guidance you have from the healthcare system during the treatment and diagnosis stages, once you're in recovery, there's not that much, he shared with me. And there's masses of information on diet, but it's all so technical, like, you know, this is X vitamin and you need this much of this vitamin and this has antioxidants in it. And Adam said, I just want someone to say, here's a meal plan. Looking at the pain points of our users, a lot of the results are US based and our users really had a strong preference to have information that they knew was from the UK. Most of the information was all over the place. It took endless searching to find what you're looking for. And a lot of the best information was stumbled across by chance, by talking to people, looking through Facebook groups. And it's very difficult to see what's available locally. Often users don't even know what to search for. They're so overwhelmed, and so they struggle with search intent. Time constraints meant that I had to take a very lean approach in the immersion stage. I tried to retrace several steps and search for chemo hats near Eastbourne. Most of the results were online stores, they weren't physical shops, and a lot of them were US based. The only promising result was this one from Cancer Research UK on the first page of the Google results. And it looked like that I could potentially find a local shop near me. When I visited the site, I was presented with a list of shops. And I had to manually expand each one to look at their address and location. When I got to the second one, it said Wrexham LL13. And if your geography is anything like mine and you have no idea where Wrexham is, you'll look at the postcode LL13 and think it must be in London because M is in Manchester, so L must be for London. Or it'll be close enough to London, so that's near Eastbourne. But then after I manually copied and pasted the postcode to my navigator, I realised it's on the other side of the country in Wales. So keeping in mind the physical and emotional state the user would be in, this can be really frustrating and tedious to have to manually go and expand each result and try and find a shop near you. We know that there's 3 ways our users like to search. The first kind of user has a clear intent. They do a direct search. I am looking for chemo hats in Eastbourne. The second one has an ambiguous intent. They do a search, but they need some kind of guidance. They don't really know specifically what they're looking for. For example, Adam, I am about to go have a colostomy. What should I know? And the third kind of user, who I'm going to call Bob, really needed a fully guided search. I'm overwhelmed with my diagnosis. I have no idea what I should be looking for. So how can we cater to all 3 different types of users? And one of the considerations was we could potentially use a chatbot to guide the user. In order to do that, we need to look at some of the challenges with chatbots and go back to the immersion and connection stages. The users describe them to be very cumbersome. I'd rather not have to keep typing in and responding to the bot's questions. I accidentally clicked the wrong reply to the bot and couldn't undo or change it. Imagine having to type persistent trophoblastic disease and choriocarcinoma every time you talk to a chatbot to tell it what cancer you have. Or even pronouncing it if you're using a voice interface. I tried that with Siri and it gave me some results to do with a plastic disease to do with corals in the Atlantic, which had absolutely nothing to do with cancer. So chatbots are very slow and inefficient, and you might have to go through a lengthy conversation before you can get to the results. So how can we make this experience more efficient for users with a very clear intent, like the example I gave with Avril? So one of the ways Avril could potentially search is by just typing in a search as soon as she starts the conversation with the chatbot. Are there any chemo hat shops near me in Eastbourne? And then the chatbot would immediately give the results. Another way she can search if she's not feeling very chatty is by using some filters on the side. So I came up with the idea of a customizable chatbot. And here Avril would enter breast cancer, chemotherapy, hats, and potentially a location, and she'd immediately be given hat shops near her and a map. Another challenge is chatbots are unforgiving. One of the chatbots I tried, it was taking my demographic data and it only gave me multiple choice options. And I accidentally hit male instead of female, and that drove me crazy and made me panic, and I wanted to undo it. And there was nowhere in the settings or anywhere I could undo or go back or amend my response. So from this point onward, this chatbot would think I was a male instead of a female. So is there a way our users can go back and amend their previous messages without having to restart the entire conversation from scratch, either when they've made a mistake or they've changed their mind and want to search for something differently? An example of messenger interface that does this is Telegram. I absolutely love the fact that you can go back and you can edit messages you've sent. So say I've changed my mind, I don't want to search for wigs, I want to search for hats, I can go back and change it. And I thought this was something we could potentially incorporate into a chatbot experience. And it could regenerate the results it gives after you've edited a previous search query. And how can we guide users who don't know what to search for or just want to find out what's available specific to their journey? So like Bob, who's completely overwhelmed and does not know where to begin with his search. And in this, either the chatbot could potentially detect hesitation in the user and offer an initial prompt. So try asking me a question using keywords such as cancer type, treatment, or local services. And if there's still hesitation in the user, it could follow up by giving suggestions. We can also try and detect rage clicks, random scrolling, or backtracking to see if a user is getting frustrated or confused. And the chatbot could adjust prompts accordingly. And the other cool thing with this is with the customization filter that I previously showed you, the suggestions that the chatbot would give could be optimized for the user and they could be customized for them. The other thing I wanted to talk about was accessibility. There's a lot of health tech out there that is inadvertently only accessible to those of more affluent socioeconomic groups. So how can we make our health tech products more accessible to low-income households, families that have an income of lower than 20k? I think that's approximately 40% of the UK population, but I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on this. And I came across this study, a user research report by the Department for Work and Pensions. It's a 74-page report, and they did both primary and secondary research, including landscape gap analysis, user interviews, and questionnaires. And the reason why I find this interesting is because it gives us insights into how to engage and re-engage users and families of this low socioeconomic group. And this can be applied not just in areas of parental conflict, but in any other areas as well. One of the things they looked at are what are the online behaviors of families from these low-income households. Most people struggled with search intent, and this we also saw in the example of Cancer Central with the overwhelmed user. They don't know what to be looking for or what to be typing with search. And many of them, after they've attempted to search and didn't find any relevant results, did not feel confident enough that they could amend the search and find better results. And they just gave up on the search task altogether. They didn't respond favorably to digital offerings that required higher level digital skills or the inputting of personal information, for example, apps that required downloading and registration. And they were very suspicious of forms and email registrations and preferred to remain anonymous. And this is an important consideration as well if you're making a health tech product. The other thing the report looked at was where do they go online and what devices do they use? Most of this group did have access to smartphones, but they had very limited data allowance. The smartphones were of the latest generation. Interestingly, many parents did not own or regularly use laptops or computers. If available, computers and laptops were more favored by children in the household. So generally, they didn't browse the internet. Their behavior online was mostly a narrow band of activities, such as browsing social media networks, Facebook and Instagram. 74% of this group is active on Facebook. And this is very interesting for product teams. If you're working with your marketing team or if you're just a founder of a startup, there's no point investing so much time and effort in product design and UX on development if you are not investing the time in social media and marketing and you're not hanging in these places where these users are hanging. Parents really favored short and snappy videos. This was mainly due to data download restrictions. So if you have videos on your product or your website, make sure they're short. The last consideration I wanted to share from the report was the reading age of the text. The average reading age of adults in the UK is 9 years, and that is the recommendation of the government. So make sure you're paying attention to what the reading age of the copy on your product is. I wanted to share with you this quote by Marina Yolanska. Designers should be deeply aware that they work primarily not for self-expression, not for showing their creativity to the world, not for creating something revolutionary new that will make the world go around in the opposite direction, but they work to solve the user's problems, satisfy their wishes, and achieve business goals. The few things I want you to take away from my talk today is own your story and your experiences. If you're having a tough time with the current situation or generally in a tough place in your life, don't beat yourself up. Go back, look at your experiences and see how do they make you stronger and better at what it is that you want to do. I really recommend reading Key Person of Influence by Daniel Priestley. It's available free as a PDF. Strive to design products that promote empathic behavior in our users, such as the examples Daniel Harvey gave. Use an empathic framework when designing. You don't have to use a framework. With some people, if you're very innately empathic, it probably will naturally come to you to be following a procedure or a process that is like that. But for others, it's good to have a structure to it. So the Kupri and Vista framework is very beneficial for that. Make sure your designs are inclusive and empowering for the user. When Avril said she felt like she had failed, that really hit me. And that is the kind of thing that we're trying to get rid of as UX designers. And don't compromise our users' needs to make something cool. For example, chatbots are all the rave, but ask yourself, is it really the best thing for the user? And will you be able to build it in a way that will be effective and be functional and practical for the user? Also, in case there are any parents really struggling working from home during lockdown, I thought I'd share with you some behind the scenes of when I was working on Cancer Central Phase 1 and just tell you I really feel your pain. It is tough when you don't have childcare and you still have to work. My little one got up to gardening. And the last thing I wanted to tell you guys about was a passion project that I'm working on. It's an app for families. It promotes development of empathy, raising children with good emotional intelligence. And the long-term goal with it is to increase EQ and prevent mental health issues in the first place by helping parents and empowering them. So if there's any like-minded people out there, please do get in touch with me. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to answering any questions you have in the Q&A.
There you go, Nabila, that was great. How do you feel watching yourself back?
My comments would be exactly the same as Greta. I like listening to myself speak.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you're your harshest critic, but it was a really, really good talk. So, Greta, how did you find Nabila's talk?
Yeah, it was really interesting, especially the bits, the chatbot stuff, because I've done a bit of chatbot as well. So it was interesting to see you've had sort of the same challenges and ideas. I've actually got a question because sort of your own company, and I was just interested, what were the challenges when you set up your UX company, especially because you went into a specific niche? How did you do that?
Yeah, where do I begin with challenges? I could keep going on with that, but I think the biggest challenge for me was overcoming that imposter syndrome and the self-doubt. So as soon as you realize you can do it, then where there's a will, there's a way. So, and I think Avril was that's why I call her my angel. She was a big motivator and she inspired me. Networking is so important. Asking people, meeting them up for coffees, founders, everyone you know, and any questions you have of how are they doing this, how are they doing that, everybody's willing. I that was quite surprising for me, how open people are and how willing they are to share how they founded their business. And there's no sense of competitiveness there. I can go to another competitor UX firm and they will give me lots of advice, and I think that's amazing. But I still say I'm still in the early ages, I'm still in the infancy, and the highlight for me is the fact that it gives me full freedom as a parent to choose my own hours, and that is the goal for me as I expand it and I grow it, is to have, and I think it's perfect during this coronavirus as well and lockdown. It just shows how much important having remote and flexible work is, And the fact that we've been working like this from the beginning, and we've been having remote workshops. I was speaking to somebody earlier today, and they were saying they're having to cancel their UX workshops because they've never done them remotely. And I think this just shows that there's definitely benefits to be able to have that work right from the start. Yeah.
The other question that I had, actually, because I'm always really interested in how other people do user testing, and because you were talking about the empathy framework.
Yeah.
And so when you redone like sort of an empathy task, I guess you found out what was wrong, you redo the design, like how do you then test that again? Like, do you sort of look out for specific things, or do you just test as any other test?
I think with Cancer Central, we are still not as UX mature in the testing side. And that is where we're trying in the current phase to up our game with testing. We've had a bit of a slow start with testing. It's mostly been analytics and Hotjar and looking at that, and that's what we're trying to implement, and just the user interviews to try and get the insights. So we are, and I think that's make me want to ask you another question as well. Is you mentioned that you say even no matter how quick and how small the project is, you must do the testing. How would you advise people doing that now? So because we were planning to do some testing and research for Cancer Central around this phase, but now I'm a bit like, I don't know how we will be able to find users, and especially when everybody's so vulnerable. So what advice would you give? How could we go about doing the testing and optimize it and not let it hold us back just because we're all in lockdown?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's always also a bit of a budget question. So if you want to do really low budget for example, the podcast app, we didn't have much money. We were literally bribing people on social media just for like 20 quid Amazon vouchers and kind of reaching out to our community. Then if you have a little bit more money, now I have with Swiss Re, for example, I use a company called Testing Time. They do really, really good remote recruits. And also, if once you're not happy with the recruits because they didn't quite fit the profile, you can actually ask for the money back. So that's a really safe bet. And they also do in all sorts of languages. And then I recently signed up, which I think is totally worth the money, for an annual subscription of Lookback. Lookback is basically, you can have like online calls with people, and you can see their face and their screen. And you can ask them questions, and it's really good because you can sort of both see where they emotionally struggle and don't understand, but also where they click. And I think that's like $500 a year or something, and you get all of the recordings automatically, and people from your team can observe and comment at the same time. I think that's, if that's affordable for you, that's literally the best tool, I think, for remote testing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
great.
Sorry.
So no, that's fine. So we have got a question for both of you guys. So there's actually two questions from Dan and Jaya, who I know is over in Australia at the moment. So he's the first question, which is to both of you, is what's the biggest challenge you faced creating your talks?
Fear.
Same. Yes, I had to watch a TED talk. It's one of my favorite on vulnerability, just to get myself back into that mode, and to, because I always sign up to, I've done a few speaking events. I always sign up, and then when it gets to a couple of days before, and I'm like, Nabila, what were you thinking? Why did you sign up to this? And you suddenly feel extremely vulnerable, but it's all about embracing that vulnerability. So and just telling yourself, actually, if it's uncomfortable, then you're doing the right thing. This is what you should be doing.
Yeah, that's true. I've got the motto I have is do one thing a day that scares you. And so I always think, why did I do this? Why did I throw myself out there? But because you learn so much. My preparing tools weren't as sophisticated. I was actually watching YouTube beauty tutorials in lockdown, and I realized that as superficial as it is, they are really highly trained in speaking in front of the camera and keeping you engaged, sometimes for 45 minutes. And so I think that's really was actually good training for me to watch that. It sort of made me feel more at ease in what I can do.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy, but I think both of you guys did really, really well. Before I go on to, I think there's a kind of second part of this first question, which Dan and Jay has now asked. So how did you guys overcome, you might have touched on that already, but how did you overcome those fears outside of the YouTube videos and tutorials?
Is Greta gonna go first, or? I'm just thinking, how did I overcome the fears outside of YouTube? I think for me, when I speak, any speaking event is the lead up to it. Once I'm in it and once I'm doing it, I'm fine. So I'm like a wreck, especially evening events. They're the worst because that day is torture for me. And I've been like this from the start. But like if I need to speak on the spot, if I'm at a workshop and I never intended to speak, but I end up speaking, I'm usually I'm okay with that. So it's I think it's that just you have that positive self-talk, and it's okay to, you know, listen to affirmations or listen to YouTube videos, or just surround yourself with the positivity and the belief, and overcome the negative self-talk and stop telling yourself you can't do this. And every time, I think what for me was interesting was when I went to these events, a lot of them I felt like were a lot more senior to me, and I felt like, oh my god, they're going to be like, who's this girl? You know, what authority does she have to talk on UX? And the feedback I got was overwhelming afterwards. That was really encouraging, and most of the people were like, we had no idea this was your first one, and I thought it was really obvious. So I think we really blow it up in our minds. We really are our worst critics. So you have to remind yourself that and realize people are nice, especially in UX. At least I know in these events people are very nice.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same for me. You just have to, like, with every time you do it, of course, you kind of get less nervous, and I always kind of get the heartbeat and the sort of high-pitched voice for the first 5 minutes. But then I also sort of just realize, as you watch other people talk, like, everybody's nervous, no one knows everything. And I think the biggest part you have to think of, like, if anybody asks you to speak about something that isn't your expertise, say no, because I think then you feel uncomfortable and you think, oh God, someone's going to ask me something I don't know. So I think as long as you speak about stuff that you know inside out because you do it every day, then it can't really go wrong.
Yeah, that's probably good advice. But I think, again, you guys have done really, really well. Final question, and then you're free to relax. Is what was your biggest challenge influencing UX practices to your stakeholders?
I think for me, I really had to advocate. I think it was always advocating for the user. So when I joined Cancer Central, initially it was just a design project. It was just design, like UI fully. And this talking empathy and understanding also the founder and where they're coming from and what their goals and their motivations are for why they founded the product, that that helps you to be able to communicate with them. And that you know, Avril got that. She understood because she's been through cancer herself. She understood the importance of empathy and that made it having that UX conversation a lot more easier. And yeah, it was interesting. You know, I there were times I had to really be like, no, Avril, no, we're not doing this. We need to slow down. We need to, and you have to have that confidence to be able to say it in a polite way. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more like showing what you can change with design. So I realized in the recent role that when I showed them how quickly we can create prototypes and how quickly we can get results with real users, that they saw the strength in design and why you need a UX designer in a feature team, because you can sort of test things rapidly, much faster than you would do with a sort of development prototype. And also they saw that we're addressing the actual target audience. And I think that sort of convinced the stakeholders I work with at the moment, definitely.
I think it's important to understand which stakeholder and what so some stakeholders are very business orientated, so you need to talk numbers with them. Some are more user orientated, so you need to talk users with them. And as long as you understand that, then you should be able to win them over.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, look, guys, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evenings, and you didn't need to stress or anything like that. I think it was really, really good. But what I will do is I'll just make your LinkedIn profiles accessible for everyone else, if that's all right. And if anyone who's watching this at a later day or who's rewatching has any further questions or anything like that, then you can just reach out to Greta or Nabila, and then I'll also put mine on there as well if you do have any more general questions But look, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this evening. I hope you all had something really good to take away from it. It was definitely really, really interesting from our perspective, and lots of points to talk about, and we could continue talking about it for ages, but some of us have to eat dinner, so or breakfast, depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, look, thank you so much again. Thanks, Greta. Thanks, Nabila. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys again very, very soon. So stay safe. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.